The New York Jets are now on the board.
Okay, Jet fans, Darrell, read this.
Being in New York has been one of the greatest blessings.
Zach's Fifth Avenue ran that one right now.
The New York Jets select.
Welcome to another episode of NFL Draft Preview. Ethan Greenberg joined every week by the Athletics' Dane Brugler. I dressed up for today's episode. We got a juicy one. We're talking the defensive line. You know Robert Saleh loves his defensive lineman. Joe Douglas probably likes his offensive lineman a little more, but you know that he believes it all starts up front. So I just want to start with this, Dane. I feel like you never talk about a draft class that is deep specifically at edge. And while there are no real blue chip players, or so you've told us, feels like this class is kind of an anomaly because you could get a quality player not only in round one, but all the way into day two and day three.
Yeah, I think so. And every draft has its own identity. And a lot of times, whatever the quarterbacks look like, that kind of attaches itself to whatever the identity is. But I think this draft class, when we look back at it 4 or 5 years from now, yes, we'll be talking about the quarterbacks and how that all shakes out. But I think we'll also be talking about the pass rushers and the amount of guys that end up being quality NFL pros because of what they bring to the field as pass rushers, as run defenders, as guys that can really impact the game. And this draft has it at every single point in the draft. So this is a great year to get an edge rusher. It's kind of the opposite of what we saw last year. Remember, last year, we didn't have a pass rusher in the top half of round one. This year, we could see 4 pass rushers go top 10. So I think the lack of quarterbacks helps a little bit this year, pushes some of these edge rushers up. But there's no doubt that these guys deserve to be talked about as early first-round picks and guys that will come in and contribute early.
I just want to set the table here. You just said it. And I said it too. There's no like Myles Garrett, Bosa brother, Chase Young of this group. But when you say there are quality NFL players, I think a lot of people say like, okay, well, like who is that? Who's an example of a quality NFL player that's maybe not the elite player, or maybe it's it doesn't need to be a comp in terms of player, but just in terms of production, in terms of play snaps on any given Sunday. Like what is an equivalent for somebody that could be drafted on day 2 or day 3 and specifically, and then we'll talk about the round one guys later on.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen guys, Carl Lawson's a good example of a guy who wasn't a first round pick, but was just, developed into a quality pass rusher and a guy that is, viewed as someone that you have to game plan against when you're an offense going up against him. You have to understand what he's doing at all times. And the league's full of those guys that can, really give you pressure off the edge. And this year, like I said, I think at every point in the draft, first round, we could see as many as 7 pass rushers go early in that first round. But then on day 2 and day 3, there's really isn't much fall off. And so I think at every stage of the draft, you are going to be able to get someone that is going to help your team. In round 2, round 3, how about Josh Paschal from Kentucky, a really good run defender, is going to step in from day 1, be a strong part of your rotation. If you're looking for a little more juice off the edge, how about Nick Benito from Oklahoma? Really good first step. You worry about against the run and his ability to hold up versus power, but a guy that is hard to get your hands on because he has that edge speed, has that ability to bend the edge, flatten out, get to the quarterback. So depending on what you're looking for, I think this draft has it at edge rusher.
All right, well, let's start with potentially the number 1 overall pick in April, Aidan Hutchinson out of Michigan. What makes him a potential number 1 overall selection? And I'm just curious, like, where do you think he could have gone potentially in last year's draft or in a class that had a little more blue chip talent?
Yeah, it's always tough to do that exercise. When you look at last year, we saw, so many quarterbacks go early. He's not going ahead of Kyle Pitts or Jamar Chase or probably not going ahead of Penei Sewell. And then, you got the corners, J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain. So Hutchinson, might not have been a top 10 pick last year. It's a very realistic scenario where, he goes 11, 12, somewhere in that range. But he's still a really good player. And I think you feel good about his floor, about what he's going to give you. He gives he's the type of guy that the mentality that he brings is almost as important as the physical skills. And he has the physical skills. I think he gets kind of, earmarked as that, really try hard competitor, over eager, guy that's just plays beyond his means, that type of guy. But I mean, he has the same 3-cone number as Von Miller. Like, this is not a bad athlete by any means. But I think the mentality that he does bring is something that stands out as well. Talking to one of his coaches, and he mentioned how he could never go on spring break because he wouldn't be able to reconcile the fact that he's not getting better. Like, he won't be able to relax because he's not getting better at football. That's just how he's wired, his mental makeup. And as an NFL team, you're looking for those guys that you plug in there in the trenches and is going to help you on the field and off the field. So Aiden Hutchinson has a lot of what you're looking for. He doesn't have necessarily that arc speed or the arc skills as, say, like one of the Bosa brothers, but he has the handwork. He has the ability to win in different ways, power, quickness. He's going to be a double-digit sack guy in the NFL, and that's why he is the favorite to be the number 1 overall pick. And if he doesn't go 1, he's probably going to go 2 or 3. I'm not sure the Jets at 4 will have a shot at him.
Well, that was going to be my question, is if he does not go number 1 overall, what's the likelihood that he slides to 4? It doesn't feel like it's very likely, but, never say never. That's why everybody loves the draft, because it's so unpredictable. But I will say, between Detroit being there, and he's a Dearborn native, as somebody that worked for the Jets, and Robert Sala's a Dearborn native, the storyline there is almost too good to be true. I'm sure the Jets would love to have him on their team as a player regardless, but you mentioned him, the favorite to be the number 1 overall selection. You also had Ike Ekwonu number 1 overall in your mock draft. You think that after Jacksonville's free agency, that's now switched to Aiden Hutchinson in the number 1 overall selection?
Yeah, I think so. I think with what they did in free agency, bringing in Brandon Scherf at guard, they drafted Walker Little on day 2 last year at Stanford at tackle. They tagged Cam Robinson. Jawan Taylor's still there in the mix. So I think offensive line wise, I think they're in a good spot. They could still go offensive line. That wouldn't be a shock. Or they could go Travon Walker out of Georgia and bet on his freaky skill set. But if they do go with who we believe is the favorite, Aiden Hutchinson, I don't think anybody would be surprised. Now, if they didn't, and I just can't see Aiden Hutchinson falling past Detroit at number 2. He just feels like a Dan Campbell type of guy. They need pass rush. And again, a Michigan guy who grew up just outside of Detroit. So, the geography shouldn't really factor into this, but, it's still something that would be a natural fit in terms of someone that understands the culture, that part of the country. I think Aiden Hutchinson going 1 or 2, it's hard to envision anything else happening there.
So let's assume that Aiden Hutchinson is off the board by the time the Jets select at number 4. Do you think that guys like Kayvon Thibodeaux, Travon Walker, all those guys are available for the Jets taking, or you think that somebody could potentially be selected 2 or 3 overall?
Yeah, I definitely think that like Travon Walker, if he goes top 3, that shouldn't surprise anybody. There's just not many guys that have his ability, his length, his athleticism, his size, his power. And people will point to the lack of pass rush production. And they just have to understand the context of what he was asked to do in that Georgia defense. We've talked about it before, how he wasn't asked to just pin his ears back and go. He was asked to hold the point of attack, lock out, and give the linebackers free reign to rush and get after the quarterback. So, but when he was able to get to the quarterback and rush, you see the ability. And I mean, that's why he was my number 6 overall player before the combine, before he kind of blew things up. And so I think he was already in that top 10 discussion. Now, after he tested and you look at the raw traits, you think, okay, now he could go even higher. And if you're the Lions at 2, the Texans at 3, I think you're looking at Travon Walker and what he could be 2-3 years from now and thinking, all right, yeah, we'll bet on that and feel good about the guy that we're bringing to our program.
Does it worry you at all that maybe Travon Walker isn't as bendy as some natural pass rushers, or do you think that his size and speed, his athletic traits, I saw the RAS, the 9.99 athletic ability. I mean, it's just freaky stuff we're talking about. Why, as an evaluator, do you bet on that compared to things that you might not have seen from him at Georgia?
Yeah, I don't. There's different ways to rush the passer. You don't have to be Von Miller to be a bona fide, legit all-pro pass rusher. You could look more like a J.J. Watt. And that's Travon Walker. He looks more like a J.J. Watt, 6'5", 272 pounds, 35.5-inch arms. And he still was a 6'8", 3 cone. That's remarkable. Explosive lower body. And just watching the combine drills and watching him do the hoop drill was just mind-blowing. He's so long that he barely has to bend to run the hoop, but he does it so quick and so efficiently, so easily. So there's different ways to rush a passer, and I think Travon Walker's got a little bit of both, where he has power, he has length, but he also has quickness. He has some bend, some flexibility to him. So yes, is there projection involved with Travon Walker? No doubt about it. And that's why we're not talking about the slam dunk number 1 overall pick. We're talking about a guy that's in the top 10 discussion, likely to go top 3, top 5, but a guy that has all the ability, and it's not like he can't do it. It's just he wasn't asked to do it. And so you feel like you're getting a guy who just 21 years old on the upward trajectory of what he's going to be. So remember, the NFL draft and scouting, it's all about not what you've done, but what you're going to do. Projecting forward. And when you project Travon Walker forward, it's hard not to get excited.
Fair enough. And I know you've been beating that drum for a long time. So I'm excited to see what happens with Travon Walker in late April. It's almost April, which is crazy. So, and just to put things out there, like, I know you're running on fumes. Dane's working on his draft guide. It's almost there. What is all right, how about this? Over under, Dane, 4.5 Diet Mountain Dews a day.
So
this time of year in the last week,
I limit myself to 2. The bottles,
wow, okay.
So not cans. So it's what are the 16-ounce bottles, whatever they are.
Yeah.
I force myself not to have more than 2, just so I can see my kids graduate one day. But no, it's try to drink a lot of water. But then I mean, I have to offset it with some type of caffeine to just keep the juices flowing.
No coffee though, right?
I'm not a coffee drinker. No, I mean, one of my secrets is got a lot of Christmas cookies in the freezer, and so at midnight, 1 a.m. Take 3 cookies out of the freezer, and a little sugar rush, just that last hour or 2 before I go to bed, just to get that done. So that's I'm doing this a long time. And plus having 4 young kids, it's you learn these different habits at night to kind of give you that extra juice, and so I've got my own regimen.
All right, and more importantly, does Jax, your dog, stay up during the night with you while you're watching film? And does he get a little cookie once in a while?
No, he is up. I mean, he lays at my feet and before he goes to bed. So yeah, he's used to long hours and he knows the drill. He's been doing this a long time.
All right, fair enough. Well, on that note, let's move on to Kayvon Thibodeaux, because it feels like Kayvon Thibodeaux is one of those guys that's also in that top 5 projection. He's also been projected to be potentially top 12 or so. So where do you stand on Kayvon Thibodeaux as a prospect, excluding everything that's potentially polarizing about him as a person, more so just as a player?
Yeah, and there's plenty to like as a player. You're getting a guy that's 6'4", 245, so maybe not quite the size that you expected. A little lighter than you want. Decent length, over 33-inch arms, but not commanding length. But I think what helps with him, he uses that forward lean so he can get into blockers, drive them backwards. He has a lot of power to what he does, and strength in his hands, powerful jab steps. There's different ways that he can win, and he's not the most fluid guy. That's not how he gets after the quarterback. But you do see him rush with upfield urgency. He has some cornering skills. He's got different go-to moves that he has. That again, they all revolve more around power than necessarily him out-athleting everybody. So length, flexibility, hand strength. You do see a lot of Jadeveon Clowney there, and Clowney, has he lived up to being the number 1 overall pick? Probably not. But he's been a really quality pass rusher since he's entered the league, when he's been healthy. So whether it's for the Texans, or the Titans, or the Browns, he's bounced around. He's kind of been like a hired gun to be that pass rusher who's going to give you quality reps as a run defender and as a pass rusher. So if Kayvon Thibodeaux has the same type of career as Jadeveon Clowney, I don't think that'd be surprising.
For Kayvon Thibodeaux, does it worry you at all about the competition that he played and the tackles that he's faced specifically this past season?
That's absolutely fair. I mean, the Pac-12, Abraham Lucas from Washington State has a good chance to get drafted in the top 100. Kellan Diesch from Arizona State is a pretty good left tackle who will be drafted likely on day 3. But it's not a league known for, at least for the left tackles right now. They have in the past, but last year, not necessarily a ton of high-end talent. And that's something that is part of the discussion, because it's not like he watched 2021 tape and he doesn't necessarily get you overly excited. He had 7 sacks, decent pressure rate, but for a guy with his talent, you did expect a little bit more. He was banged up quite a bit, missed that Ohio State game, missed parts of other games. But again, for a guy with his talent, you just expected a little bit more. But I mean, nonetheless, he still led Oregon in sacks, led Oregon in tackles for loss. He was a unanimous All-American, probably more based off of name recognition than anything. But we're talking about, just like it's okay to critique Travon Walker for not having more production. Same thing with Kayvon Thibodeaux. When you watch his tape, for a guy being talked about as a top 5, potential top 7 pick, you just expected maybe a little more dominance at that level of competition.
And then lastly here, feels like the final guy in, let's say, the quartet of pass rushers that could be pretty viable options at 4 through 10 and potentially after that. The last guy is Jermaine Johnson, who maybe in January before the Senior Bowl, not a whole lot of NFL draft fans, not guys named Dane Brugler, because you definitely knew about him, but people didn't really know about him. And then he had a fantastic week in Mobile. He had a fantastic combine, and it sure seems like that he's put himself in the conversation to be a top 10 selection. So I ask you this, Dane, of the 4 guys, let's say the 3 guys, Hutchinson's off the board. You got Walker, you got Thibodeaux, you got Jermaine Johnson. The Jets are at 4 overall. Which one of these players makes the most sense for the team based on talent and, more importantly, based on scheme fit?
I'm going Travon Walker. I'm betting on those traits every day. But you could easily make a case for the other 2 guys as well. And Jermaine Johnson, he was the top defensive player going into the Senior Bowl. And after what he did in Mobile, I mean, he kind of put any doubt to rest there with the way he played at the Senior Bowl practices. A very good run defender, really good pass rusher. Maybe not elite in any one of those areas, but he's just good across the board. Bet on himself, transferring from Georgia. I think most people know his story by now. Leading the ACC in sacks, tackles for loss. Just a really quality player who maybe doesn't have that elite get off, but he plays with length. He plays with agility, active hands. He has a plan to what he's doing. His rush attack, he can win in different ways. He's very athletic on the edge, so he can play the run. He has power, so he can work off blocks and make stops in the backfield. So there's just a lot to like about what he's going to bring, and very quickly. I mean, he is, he's already 23 years old. He's, was in college for 5 years, but he's ready to come in and be an NFL starter very quickly as a rookie. So would not be hard to talk yourself into Jermaine Johnson, even as high as number 4.
Okay, I'm glad you asked that, because I feel like a lot of the mock drafts have Jermaine Johnson at number 10. Mm-hmm. And if you're the Jets, just playing devil's advocate, let's say you're convinced he's going to be selected 5 through 9. Is 4 too rich? You say no.
No, and especially if, say, Travon Walker's off the board in that scenario, because there's a good chance Aiden Hutchinson goes 1 or 2, and then Travon Walker goes 2 or 3. And if that happens, and the Jets are looking at their options, could go offensive line, could go wide receiver, could go corner, but Jermaine Johnson's sitting there, and you probably don't feel great that he's going to last you at 10. Now, there's a chance that he could, but I don't think you feel great about that. And if you love the player and you think you know what you're getting with him, and I think that's part of the appeal with Jermaine Johnson. You know what you're getting with him. I don't think there's not, with Travon Walker, a little bit of a projection there. With Kayvon Thibodeaux, little bit of a projection there because of some of the other things you have to worry about with him. Jermaine Johnson, not quite, doesn't have that So I think that when you look at Johnson, you run out of reasons why not. why he shouldn't be a top 15 pick, why he shouldn't be a top 10 pick, why he shouldn't be in the conversation at number 4. So I think absolutely, Jermaine Johnson, especially if Walker's off the board, Jermaine Johnson should at least be in that conversation if they want to go pass rusher at number 4.
All right, so now let's move on to round 2. The Jets have 35 and 38 right now as we record. You mentioned 2 guys earlier at the top of the show. The Jets also had Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State, Boye Mafe out of Minnesota on their team during Senior Bowl week. You think both of those guys also could be viable options for the Jets at either 35 or 38, or some of those guys might creep up into the back half of round 1?
Yeah, I was going to say, they definitely would be if they're there in the 30s. I think both could easily go in the first round. We know pass rushers go pretty quickly. Last year, we saw a run on those guys in the late first round, Kwity Paye and Odafe Owe, Gregory Rousseau, Peyton Turner. I mean, those guys, those pass rushers flew off the board in the late first. And we could see, a similar type of thing in this year's first round, late first round with Arnold Ebiketie and Boye Mafe, maybe Logan Hall from Houston. So that makes sense. But if one were to slip through the cracks and be there in the early second, I think the Jets would be all over that, especially if they don't go pass rusher, obviously, at 4 or 10. Ebiketie, a Temple transfer who is a really long player. He's got over 34-inch arms. It doesn't look like it. He's 6'2.5", 250, but his length really stands out. And that's how he wins. He has speed off the edge, explosive first step, uses his hands well, and his motor just doesn't quit. I mean, he makes plays away from the line of scrimmage he has no business making. But because of that motor always revving, it's something that is a strong selling point with him. Does he need refinement? Yes, especially versus the run. But with a guy with his length, his first step quickness, and with his relentless hustle, you're going to bet on that every time. So Arnold Ebiketie, I think I just made a case why he won't be there in the 30s. But why, if he is, the Jets should be all over him.
All right, how about this, Dane? Can you give us somebody, let's say, day 3, who you really think that he has a chance to develop into a quality starter? And let's say he's available for the Jets on day 3 somewhere.
Well, we talked about, I believe we talked about him with the mock draft with Christopher Allen out of Alabama. I think he's a guy that's flying under the radar right now because of his injury. I think he'd be in that mix. Maury Barno from Virginia Tech ran the fastest 40-yard dash of any pass rusher at the combine. I think he's a guy that you could develop. He needs time. He needs work. But when you have that type of speed and have that type of length and that ability, just bring him to in our program, and we'll get the most out of him. So we talked about how this pass rusher class, every step of the draft, there's going to be guys. There's going to be good players that get pushed to day 3, and there's only so many spots for these guys to go. So even a guy like, say, Cameron Thomas from San Diego State, who played really well this year, and we thought, okay, probably going to be a second-round pick. But when you start laying it out, all of a sudden, probably go more third round. Maybe he goes to the 4th round, just because there's such a high volume of pass rushers and these edge guys that someone's going to fall to the 4th, 5th round. And it could be a guy like Cameron Thomas, could be a guy like Jesse Luketa from Penn State. So there's several pass rushers who you could get a good value on in those middle rounds.
Jesse Luketa, also a guy that the Jets coached up at the Senior Bowl, somebody to keep an eye on there. And who's the other guy? Dominique Robinson?
Yeah, Miami, Ohio. Yeah, really former wide receiver. Never started a game at pass rusher in his life. He was a sub-package guy for the Redhawks. And but his athleticism and his power, I mean, there's something there. And so I'll be surprised if he doesn't go 3rd round, but if he doesn't, that's a heck of a value in the 4th round.
Also, the Jets have the 69th overall selection right now in the 3rd round, something to keep an eye on as well. You said the Redhawks. It just made me think of all the scouting that you do. What is like your favorite team name? You got to have one, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, and it's because I was watching. It's not the team name, not the mascot, but I discovered Castleton College or University the other day. They have a Division III school. They have a pass rusher who tested pretty well at his pro day. But a small school in Vermont who has got a talented little talented program up there. So Castleton, it sounded like a fun school. So I discovered that, which I didn't know much about.
Okay, all right. And what year is this for you doing the draft? And whatever it is, you're still learning. That's what makes you great, Dane. That's what makes you great. Always learning.
Every year there seems to be like one school that I never heard of, and it's Central Methodist, or it's American International, or there's just a lot of different schools that whether it's NAIA, Division II, Division III, there's a lot of levels of schools and football players trying to get their name out there. So it's fun to learn about these guys when they hit my desk.
All right, great. This is how I want to wrap up this episode. You kind of talk. It's been a kind of a theme of your answers. Like, if that guy is there in the top of round 2, if that guy is there at the top of round 4, like Dominique Robinson. So let me ask you this. Last year, there was a guy that the Jets selected, Elijah Moore. If he's there in round 2, you're probably turning in the card. He was there. They did just that. So not just defensive lines. Like, I want the full scope of positions here that I want to ask you about. And if you're the Jets, like, who are more guys like Elijah Moore that could go in the back half of round 1, but also could slip through the cracks, be there in round 2, and you're running up the card with happiness, saying this is who was there, and we wanted this guy. We thought about trading up like the Jets did with Elijah Moore, and he said, you know what, we're gonna stay here, and then we're gonna select him there.
I think there's maybe three positions we could look at here. So, the receivers, if we know that, guys like Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Jameson Williams, probably they're going to go early. Is there one or two of these guys that would fall a little bit, whether that's Chris Olave, whether it's Jahan Dotson, some of these guys, would they fall a little bit? And if they do, maybe the Jets would pounce. I'm really interested in the secondary as well, though. The safeties, Kyle Hamilton, who, by the way, did not run well at his pro day. He's actually ran slower at his pro day than he did the combine, which is very surprising to see. Kyle Hamilton's, I've kind of been saying he's not going to go maybe as early as people think throughout the process. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't go top 10. But after Kyle Hamilton's off the board, who's that next safety? Is it Dax Hill? Is it Lewis Cine? But we could see maybe who's that number 2 safety, and where does he go? Could he slip to the early part of the second round? And that's a part where part of the draft where the Jets would be all over a guy like Cine, who they can help fortify the back end of their defense. And then same thing with corners. After Sauce Gardner's off the board, Trent McDuffie, and then Derek Stingley. Is there another corner that they have a first-round grade on, or an early second-round grade on, who, an Andrew Booth out of Clemson, somebody like that who could easily go late first round, but the Jets, they've got their eye on him, and they just kind of crossing their fingers that he falls to the early second. So there's definitely a good mix of those guys. And maybe throw out David Ojabo as well from Michigan, who unfortunately the torn Achilles at his pro day, most likely going to have some type of redshirt year, which he was going to anyways because he's such a young player. But now that you factor in the injury, and all of a sudden there's going to be a likely chance he's available after round 1. So he'll probably go somewhere on day 2. And if the Jets are comfortable with the injury and the timeline of when he's going to have, until he's going to get back and healthy and contribute, David Ojabo is a name that's on the radar now that maybe you weren't talking about a couple weeks ago.
After I forgot to bring this up, but I was so focused on the edge guys. I think maybe one of the guys that could be included in that conversation potentially snuck his way into round 1. You tell me if I'm wrong here. After Jordan Davis out of Georgia, I'm looking at Travis Jones out of UConn, who had a good Senior Bowl week. If you're the Jets, is he in that same boat where maybe he could be in like picks 20 to 32? And if not, if he's there at 35 or 38 and you want to add some depth up front, you're running that up as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big Travis Jones fan. Something about UConn defensive tackles. I was a big fan of Fadakasi, right?
That's right.
A couple years ago, and Jets drafted him. They got him, 5th, 6th round?
6th round.
Yeah, and so, Travis Jones is a really good player. He's going to go much earlier than the 6th round. Could easily go top 30 somewhere for a team. But if he were to fall a little bit, I think he's for the longest time, I was saying, instead of Jordan Davis in round 1, just wait till day 2, get Travis Jones. After the Senior Bowl, after what he did at the Combine, Travis Jones, he's moved himself up. There's no doubt. Guys like him go top 50 all day, and possibly even the first round. So a guy that can win with quickness, he's got power. No one could block him at the Senior Bowl in one-on-ones. So you've got a guy that's able to play with that type of momentum at his size, play through his hips. He just creates problems for blockers because of his athleticism, because of his explosiveness, both his upper body and his lower body. He can two-gap. He can be disruptive. So Travis Jones, I mean, I think I just laid out the reasons why he probably won't be an option for the Jets because he's not going to make it there. But if he does, I wouldn't be surprised to see if the Jets pounce on him.
Crazier things have happened, I think, than,
Yes,
potentially
we love the
Travis
draft.
Jones being there. Yeah. You're right. You're absolutely right. So this is how we're going to wrap up this episode here. We're going to have, I don't want to say like a mock draft, but if you could choose one player, right? You have a crystal ball, and you could choose one player to fall to the Jets at 35 or 38 after whoever you want to choose at 4 and 10, and you think this is like an absolute home run of a draft. So let's say in your case, you're probably looking at Travon Walker at 4. I don't know who you're looking at 10, whether that's a receiver, whether that's a corner, defensive, another edge player, anybody you want at 10. Who's the player at 35 that slipped through the cracks at the end of round 1 to turn a very good draft into a great draft after the Jets' first 3 picks?
How realistic do I need to be? I mean, it's
semi-realistic.
Maybe the most perfect scenario is so many teams are scared off by Jameson Williams' ACL injury that he slips through the cracks a little bit, falls to 35, and the Jets jump all over. I don't think that there's like a 2% chance of that happening. If the Jets want him, they have to take him at 10. And who knows? He could go 8. He might not even be available at 10. He's that good of a player. But with an ACL injury, you don't know how teams are going to respond to that. More realistically, I would probably say one of these safeties, whether it's Dax Hill from Michigan or Lewis Cine from Georgia. Two guys that are going to come in and really help the back end of your defense. Guys that can play the run really well. They can cover, and they're really going to give you something. So I think those 2 guys would make sense. Both could easily go top 32. But if they were going to slip a little bit, I think the Jets would not be upset to see them on the board when they pick in round 2.
All right, so Dane has Travon Walker, Jameson Williams, and either Dax Hill or Lewis Cine. Is that what we're turning the card in March 29th?
That sounds like a home run to me. I mean, if this team is confident in where the offensive line is right now with Mekhi Becton, and then you're able to, and if that's the case, you're able to really address the defensive line. You're able to address receiver, boost the secondary. I mean, that's exactly what you want to do through the draft. That sounds like a home run to me.
All right. That's a great way to end this episode of NFL Draft Preview. Dane, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks, Ethan.